let's get down to the excitement of the day. And that is our guest, Audrey Kitagawa. Audrey is a lawyer and international leader in peacemaking. She's also a leader in anti-racism movements, interreligious cooperation, and nuclear disarmament. Many of you will remember her from the launch of the Living Earth movement. She produced the inaugural ZOOMcast that marked the birth of a magnificent global organization and celebrated John Cobb's 97th birthday. Audrey leaves her mark on many global organizations, and I'm going to name several of these. I don't expect you to remember every name, but I'd like you to have a sense of the range of her own work, and I'd also like for you to have a sense of the organizations that are doing good work around the world. First, she is president and founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. She's president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family and former advisor to the special representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict at the United Nations. She is a United Nations representative for the United Religions Initiative, often called URI, a board member of the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and a member of the Advisory Council of Global Security Institute. Now, that's just the beginning. I'm going to name a few more, but I'm not giving you a comprehensive list. She's also served as board chair of the Parliament of World Religions, chair of the Anti-Racism Initiative, and co-chair of the Gender Equality Working Group of the G20 Interfaith Forum. She is Ambassador of Religions for Peace International, and she's former advisor to the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict at the United Nations. Now, I've been featuring Audrey's work in the world, but she's also distinguished herself in writing. And she writes on the very themes represented by her activism. Some of her articles in book chapters include Globalization as a Fuel for Religious and Ethnic Conflict, the U.S. and Foreign Affairs, subtitle, Source of Global Security, or Source of Global Fear. And the IF-20 Anti-Racism Initiative Response to Racism. That gives you almost only a small taste of the writing she's done. Audrey also has been honored by many, and I want to name a few so you'll have a sense of the range of her honors. First, she was installed into the royal family of Ayayamanti, Ghana, as the Nkoso Himaa. I need to ask you, Audrey, how to pronounce that better.
Yes, you did it quite correctly. Nkoso Himaa.
Wonderful, thank you. And that translates as Queen Mother of Development. In that same community, she helped build a junior secondary school, which is now named after her. Second, she was honored with the Spirit of the UN Award that honors outstanding individuals who have demonstrated the vision and spirit of the UN. Finally, she received a New York State Assembly citation as a distinguished honoree for her lifetime of selfless service to the state of New York and the international peacekeeping community. That is a small taste of what Audrey Kitagawa has done for this world. And we are so fortunate to have you here this morning, Audrey. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth, for that introduction. And hello, everyone from New York City. I express my deepest appreciation to our very dear friend, John Cobb, who has been an inspiring and tireless advocate for peace, cooperation, and an ecological civilization that addresses the environmental issues that calls us to examine our actions that threatens to destroy our environment and ourselves along with it because of the mutual dependence of human beings and all other living things. A healthy earth assures the sustainability of our own health and lives. Ultimately, destruction of the earth means destruction of ourselves. And I thank John Cobb and Friends for this invitation to share today about one of the most significant existential threats to all of life, and that is nuclear weapons. Since the dropping of the first and second nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki 79 years ago, we have understood the destructive power of these weapons to destroy our environment and cause the mass deaths of people. We have ever since been living in a world of growing insecurity as we have watched the US go from being the only possessor of nuclear weapons till today with 9 nuclear weapon countries. Soon, Iran will have the capability of nuclear weapons, and Saudi Arabia announced that when Iran nuclearizes with weapons, so will Saudi Arabia. If Iran gets an operational nuclear weapon, all bets are off, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud said in an on-stage interview at the World Policy Conference in Abu Dhabi when asked about such a scenario. We are in a very dangerous space in the region. You can expect that regional states will certainly look towards how they can ensure their own security. Likewise, the president of South Korea declared that if North Korea's nuclear threat grows, South Korea would consider building nuclear weapons of its own or ask the US to deploy them on the Korean peninsula. State security is not equivalent to human security. Human security is a paradigm for understanding global vulnerabilities whose proponents challenge the traditional notion of national security through military security by arguing that the proper referent for security should be at the human rather than the national level. Human security reveals a people-centered and multidisciplinary understanding of security. Approximately 5 years ago, in the state of Hawaii, where I also reside, a statewide alert was issued about a nuclear missile coming in from North Korea. This alert was a false alarm due to human error. However, the panic that it caused and the lack of preparedness of the civilian population is quite apparent. Here's a news clip of what happened that day.
All right, moving on now. Hawaii's Emergency Management Agency is under fire and now reportedly receiving death threats after Saturday's terrifying false alarm. People ran for their lives after an alert mistakenly warned residents and visitors of an incoming ballistic missile. An employee at Hawaii's Emergency Management Agency pushed the wrong button, not once, but twice, triggering a wave of panic amid tensions over the threat of a nuclear strike from North Korea. At 8:07 Saturday morning, cell phones started buzzing with a message saying, "Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." State authorities canceled the alert at 8:13, 6 minutes later, but a new message wasn't sent to phones until 8:45 a.m. David Begnaud went inside the command center where the mistake happened.
The panic was palpable. Hawaiians rushing for cover under the threat of a missile attack. This child was lowered into a manhole. Another family huddled in a closet. 5,500 people called Honolulu's 911 system.
It's embarrassing, but again, it's a mistake.
Hawaii's Emergency Management Administrator, Vern Miyagi, says one of his employees clicked the wrong button twice. He was supposed to select the option for a drill. Instead, he clicked the real thing. This was the alert heard by people across the island chain.
A missile may impact on land or sea within minutes. This is not a drill.
With all due respect, are you sure this was an accident?
Yes, I know the individual. This was an accident.
But why did he hit yes twice?
That's being talked about and being investigated right now.
This is the state warning point. It was here that the mistake happened. The man who's been working for the agency for about 10 years was sitting in this chair when he pushed the wrong button. He realized within the first 2 to 3 minutes, we're told, that he had made a mistake, but it took nearly 38 minutes to get another text message alert out saying false alarm.
It is an epic failure of leadership.
Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was one of the first to correct the error on Twitter.
38 minutes of terror for the people of Hawaii before this message went out saying, sorry, false alarm.
I don't usually panic.
Noah Tom was far from his wife and children when the alert was first issued.
I thought I could do something, and yet I felt totally helpless at the same time. So I'm sitting there just kind of bawling my eyes out.
In the aftermath, people across Hawaii were confronted with this question. What would you do if this was the real thing?
It's a wake-up call saying, hey, wait a minute. I don't know what to do. Our opportunity right now is to reach out and get that information to the people.
And CBS News correspondent David Begnaud joins me now from Honolulu. So, David, explain to our viewers, why did the alert take 38 minutes to clear? What are officials telling you?
Well, they actually had to get someone who works in IT to remotely compose a message and then put a template in the computer system to then send out another text alert saying, hey, that initial alert was a false alarm. That template to say that was a false alarm didn't exist in the computer system. So essentially what happened is the guy hit the wrong button. He realized it pretty quickly, within 2 to 3 minutes, but it took almost 38 minutes to then get a new message into the system. So should they have had that backup? Yeah, for sure. They admit that. They're embarrassed, Vlad. Look, when you talk to the people who work at the Emergency Management Agency, the first thing they do is say it's our fault, it's our mistake, but you can tell how embarrassed they are over this.
Yeah, and I heard you say on CBS this morning that some of the folks you talked to thought, you know, it was the end of the world. But certainly my heart also goes out to this employee who pushed the wrong button. What's going to happen to him?
Well, he's been with the agency for about 10 years. He's not going to be fired. We're told he's going to be reassigned, but he will be welcomed back to his job as early as today. The investigation, we're told, could take 2 to 3 weeks. Look, the man who runs the Emergency Management Agency said to me, based on what he knows about this man, that he believes it was a mistake. Because I asked the question, are you sure this was a mistake? I mean, the guy hit the wrong button twice, right? He hit the live drill button. Then the computer system said, are you sure you want that? And he hit it again. So when I asked the emergency management administrator, are you sure this was an accident? He said, yes, based on everything I know, it was an accident. Will he be fired at the end of the investigation? Possibly. Right now, his name has not been revealed, and the agency, the Emergency Management Agency, is reportedly getting death threats over this.
I really do hope that they don't reveal his name, because you know how the social media mobs can be. David, from the people you've talked to, how will this experience impact their lives moving forward?
Well, look, we're not trying to be dramatic by saying some people thought this was the end of the world. I mean, you know, you have the tension with North Korea. There were people abandoning their vehicles on the freeway. I talked to a man who had just dropped his daughter off at the airport and pulled over on the side of the road and started bawling because he couldn't figure out who to go to and spend his last remaining moments with. Does he go to his work where his wife is and stay with her? Does he go home where he had left his other 2 children and stay with them? I mean, those are some of the questions family were having. They were asking themselves. I talked to one woman who's stationed with her husband at Pearl Harbor, and she says she went to the bomb shelter that exists on the base, and she couldn't get in. It was locked. I mean, there are so many stories. You could write a book, right? But, you know, people who are stateside who may be looking at this, who didn't get the alert, may think, okay, fine, it was a mistake, not a big deal. When you are living in it, and when you get it on your phone, and you read that alert, and it takes 38 minutes to get another alert saying this was a drill, I have never covered a story where the panic was more palpable than it was here.
You know, and it's interesting, you know, I grew up in the midst of the Cold War, and in the 70s and 80s in my school, we had bomb shelters right here in New York City. These schools were very old, and I wonder now, are we moving back to that period? In our state and local and federal officials going to ensure that at least, even if something like this does happen again, people don't feel or don't come up into a scenario like that gentleman you mentioned who found that the bomb shelter was locked?
Well, you know, recently, Vlad, they have started doing air raid drills here on the islands of Hawaii. So they've been activating the sirens to practice, right? This is something they haven't done in a long time. In fact, when the mistake happened and the false alarm went out, there were some sirens that went off. And that was a mistake, because what we're told is, as a part of the drill, the sirens are not supposed to go off. So now they're trying to figure out why the sirens are going off. I mean, Hawaii is having to have discussions that people here who run the island haven't heard of or really haven't talked about in decades, right? But those discussions are happening now, given the tension with North Korea. But I think it's also important to point out 2 things. Number one, a lot of people said to us, When I got the alert and I realized that this may be the real deal, I thought to myself, what can I do? Like what can I legitimately do to save my life or the life of my family? And a lot of people felt helpless. But then on the flip side, you had some people with the Emergency Management Agency who said this is a wake-up call. It's our mistake and we apologize for it. But what will you do in case this happens again? What if it is the real deal? What's your plan?
Just really scary. I'm glad, obviously, it all worked out. David Begnaud, thank you so much for your reporting. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Well, thankfully, this was a false alert caused by human error. The fact that it occurred shows you the frailty of our alert system. And the fact of being struck by nuclear missiles is probable, even though we are ill prepared for such an eventuality. When I was in elementary school, every month we had to dive under our desks, heads down, hands on our heads in case of a nuclear bomb being dropped. Nuclear bomb shelters were built in designated areas in the city. But the fact of the matter is, if we had a nuclear bomb dropped on us, hiding under your flimsy children's desks, made of wood, would not be able to protect us from the power of a detonated nuclear bomb. A 2014 documentary titled "The Man Who Saved the World" recounts the story of how one such accident was averted. In September 1983, the Soviet Air Defense Forces received a false warning of what appeared to be 5 approaching U.S. nuclear-armed missiles. Knowing that alerting his superiors would likely lead to a counterattack, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov decided to treat the warning as a false alarm. Petrov ended up being correct. What the satellites detected was a sun reflecting off clouds, not 5 missiles. At the time, Petrov was reprimanded. But in recent years, he has received recognition, receiving an award from the Association of World Citizens in 2006 and the Dresden Peace Prize in 2013. The reflection of the sun's off clouds would have changed the course of history for humankind. Our lives hang in the balance of powers outside of our control, and we must do everything possible to eliminate nuclear weapons so that we do not live in fear and insecurity of the very real possibility of nuclear war, whether caused intentionally or by error. We had just had a commemoration of the 79th anniversary of the detonation of the nuclear bombs dropped on unsuspecting civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Many remembrances, prayers, and vigils were held. The devastation which these bombs brought in terms of destruction and misery cannot be overestimated. The 2 cities were destroyed. Thousands of people were killed instantly. Many who survived suffered long-term effects of radiation, including cancers and radiation poisoning. The survivors, called hibakusha, or survivors of the bomb, became the most influential advocates for the abolition of nuclear weapons. They have spoken about their experiences in the hopes of preventing the future use of nuclear weapons. Today, there are approximately 106,825 hibakusha still alive. Each year, their numbers are declining. Their stories are powerful reminders of the unconscionable and immoral suffering upon innocents caused by nuclear weapons. Their stories must be told over and over again, because the face of suffering have real human faces and lives, and we must never forget their suffering.
world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
正義の味方になられ助けていただきたいな、そういう気持ち子供の頃持ってましたね。ですからそういう気持ちが強かったから自分の母親になるだろうとね、言葉の表現できないでね、記憶に残ってるのは偉い人になってください。それはですね、多分もう死を覚悟したことなんですね。それつらいし。
でそれはまだ家が潰れた人の下敷きにいる人たち、もう2日目ですから腐ってるんで、それから不思議に思うことは灰がね真っ暗になるぐらい人の背中について何百匹という灰が背中について飛びもしないで黙々と傷ついた人が歩いてる背中について一緒に歩いてってるんですよね。本当に不気味だ。それで川の橋を渡ると川にはもう人がプカプカプカプカ浮いて流れて、でみんな水を求めて川の方へ行った人たちが力尽きて川に入っちゃって流されていってるんですね。そういう中をその刺繍の中を黙々となんていうか歩いていくしか仕方がなかったんですね。
In the years following the end of World War II, tensions began to mount between the United States and the Soviet Union, a geopolitical struggle for dominance and global influence. This period of tension between the two world powers saw the continued development and testing of nuclear weapons, the space race, and psychological and propaganda campaigns, demonizing the other, further accelerating fear and tensions while nuclear arsenals were growing. In 1986, two world leaders, President Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev of the Soviet Union, agreed to meet to explore limiting nuclear weapons and finding a way to ease tensions between the two powers. At the Reykjavik summit, Reagan and Gorbachev found a common ground in their shared understanding of the immorality of nuclear weapons. The two leaders and their teams, including Secretary of State George Shultz, developed trust, leading to very productive discussions. In a paper on the moral and political necessities for nuclear disarmament, author Thomas Doyle recounts how trust and empathy led to the productive discussions at the height of the Cold War. Leaders often understand their own security needs, but fail to empathize with their rivals' concerns. A notable exception occurred during the Cold War when Reagan and Gorbachev began to trust each other. Gorbachev took steps to reduce Soviet forces that worried NATO, which helped ease tensions and led to the landmark Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987. This agreement proposed to eliminate all intermediate and short-range ground-based missiles and launchers from Europe. This shows that mutual trust and empathy can break the cycle of escalation and improve security for all sides. The talks collapsed at the last minute due to Reagan's refusal to abandon the United States Strategic Defense Initiative. However, the meeting resulted in several positive outcomes over the years, including 2 treaties and momentum for ongoing arms control negotiations. The 34 years after the Reykjavik summit, in conjunction with the 75th anniversary of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, Mikhail Gorbachev and George Shultz participated in a video documenting their remembrances of the collaboration in 1986 and offering their thoughts on the current global nuclear situation. They each composed a letter sharing their concerns about the current state of international diplomacy and the continued threat of nuclear weapons.
Dear friends, my nuclear journey began 75 years ago. In the summer of 1945, I was a U.S. Marine captain on a troop ship in the Pacific bound for San Diego. Early in the voyage, we heard that something called an atomic bomb had been dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. By the time we reached port in San Diego, a second bomb had been used at Nagasaki. We wouldn't be headed to the Japanese mainland after all. Ronald Reagan believed that nuclear weapons were immoral. My friend Bishop Swing has rightly observed that while the U.S. President may put his hand on the Bible at his inauguration, it is when he puts his hand on the nuclear trigger that he assumes a godlike power. But we are men, not gods. Together with President Gorbachev, we had seen the promised land, but we had not been able to get there during our negotiations. Today, I am alarmed. We live in an unsafe world that grows more dangerous with the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We need to make sure that the global population understands the gravity of the nuclear threat, and we do everything we can to reduce the risks of that threat. But I am also optimistic. I see that wise and knowledgeable people are talking about these crucial issues. Such dialogue can lead to progress, so there is hope. I have seen the promised land, so I know that it exists, and the leaders who can take us there can emerge from among our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Sincerely yours, George P. Shultz.
Дорогие друзья, я был очень рад узнать от моего друга Джорджа Шульца, что в связи с 75-й годовщиной атомной бомбардировки Хиросимы ваша организация планирует выступить с совместным заявлением о необходимости ликвидации ядерного оружия. It is a passionate appeal to join the fight for a nuclear weapon-free future for all mankind. Fighting for the abolition of nuclear weapons is the civic duty of each and every one of us. Together with you, I am appealing to the citizens of all countries. Put pressure on your leaders, politicians, and elected officials. Keep telling them again and again that the very existence of nuclear weapons poses a deadly threat to humanity. Demand that they take concrete action so that the arsenals of nuclear weapons get smaller with every passing year. We started on the road to a world without nuclear weapons in Reykjavik. It turned out to be a difficult and thorny path. But there must be no other goal than the complete elimination, the abolition of nuclear weapons. I wish you the strength of spirit, dedication, and perseverance in advancing that goal. С уважением, Михаил Горбачев.
Both gentlemen passed away shortly after writing these letters, George Shultz in 2021 and Gorbachev in 2022. But their legacies of diplomacy, statesmanship, and trust are inspiring examples of what is possible when leaders have vision that extends beyond their own borders, and they truly understood the gravity and importance of abolishing nuclear weapons, with a shared understanding that nuclear weapons are immoral and unethical. Their efforts resulted in positive change. Schultz, reflecting on the Reykjavik summit, said, "Trust is the currency of diplomacy. Trust inherently implies integrity and is a mark of an individual's moral compass, that they keep their word and honor their commitments." And the trust between Reagan and Gorbachev was built on their understanding that they stood together on the same moral and ethical ground. And they affirmed this in a joint statement that said, a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Their relationship created measurable results, reducing nuclear weapons in both countries. The world's nuclear arsenal has been reduced by more than 2/3 since 1986, when there were around 70,000 warheads, to an estimated 12,500 in 2024. There is much more to be done, but the progress they made demonstrated what can be done when there is trust between individuals and when the greater good of humankind is raised above the nationalistic imperatives of individual nations. Although the number of nuclear warheads declined significantly in the 38 years since Reykjavik, the numbers have begun to trend upward in recent years. Earlier this year, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute reported that while the global total of nuclear warheads continues to fall as Cold War-era weapons are gradually dismantled, regrettably, we continue to see year-on-year increases in the number of operational nuclear warheads. This trend seems likely to continue and probably accelerate in the coming years, and is extremely concerning. The report goes on to say, we are now in one of the most dangerous periods in human history. There are numerous sources of instability, political rivalries, economic inequalities, ecological disruption, an accelerating arms race. The abyss is beckoning, and it is time for the great powers to step back and reflect, preferably together. According to the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, a single nuclear weapon can destroy a city and kill most of its people. Several nuclear explosions over modern cities would kill tens of millions of people. Casualties from a major nuclear war between the US and Russia would reach hundreds of millions. Nuclear weapons cause indiscriminate harm. In 2018, the UN Human Rights Committee affirmed that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is incompatible with respect for the right to life and may amount to a crime under international law. And yet nuclear arsenals are being strengthened around the world as these states modernize their stockpiles and deploy new weapons. Last March, in advance of the 2023 G7 summit in Hiroshima, the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, along with the G7 Research Group and Soka Gakkai International, held a conference at Soka University to create recommendations for the G7 leaders. I would like to share a short clip of my remarks at that conference. Ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means way of living. It is concerned with human conduct and more specifically, the behavior of individuals in society. Morals deal with standards and rules of good conduct in society, and law as a cognitive process regulates social life through the promulgated rules crafted by a legitimate authority. Ethics and morality are sometimes used interchangeably. Morality and laws are inextricably intertwined because morality has affected the formation of the legal system and the rules of conduct in society. These adjudicatory bodies and processes are designed to render justice. Using the word spiritual relates to the human spirit or soul, as opposed to material or physical things. The foundational premises of the codification of treaties, conventions, declarations, and regulatory functions, which laws are designed to address, come from an inherent recognition of the sanctity of life and relates to the spiritual dimension. This spiritual dimension manifests in multitudinous forms and structures, but simultaneously transcends them. It is therefore universal in its nature, even as its manifestations appear specific. Ethics, morals, and the spiritual dimensions are foundational to what we are discussing today on controlling nuclear weapons. We must always remember that true security must be ontological security, which is that sense of stability that emerges in response to the need to experience oneself as a whole continuous being and having a positive view of self, the world, and the future. At the conclusion of the conference, we developed our recommendations for the 2023 G7 Hiroshima Summit, which were submitted to the G7 Summit planners. A few months later, at the G7 Summit in May 2023, the G7 leaders adopted the Vision on Nuclear Disarmament, the first ever standalone joint statement by the G7 on the issue of nuclear disarmament, and a reaffirmation of the commitment to achieving a world without nuclear weapons. It included concrete measures and recommendations, including enhancing transparency with regard to nuclear weapons, engaging with non-nuclear weapon states in dialogue on transparency, and limiting nuclear competition. The pre-notification of relevant strategic activities, a call on Russia and China to engage in multilateral and bilateral fora in line with their NPT obligations, immediate commencement of negotiations of a treaty banning the production of fissile material, and bringing the CTBT into force. In light of the recent geopolitical developments, these recommendations are very important. Dialogue between the US and Russia, ongoing since the Reykjavik summit, have slowed or stalled completely. Last year, Russia announced that they would pull out of the New START treaty that requires the US and Russia to hold on-site inspections, and President Putin has threatened the use of nuclear weapons in the war against Ukraine. The US and other countries have maintained a policy of nuclear deterrence, the belief that nuclear weapons can prevent attack by other countries with a threat of retaliation and mutual destruction. However, the very existence of nuclear weapons and the threat of using them in a retaliatory attack is as immoral as an initial attack, and we must not utilize it as a false equivalent to true security. The strategy of deterrence relies on the threat of massive destruction to prevent conflict. This is morally problematic because it threatens to harm millions of people. Even threatening such harm is inherently immoral, regardless of whether the threat is actually carried out. In this climate of escalation and threats, the element of trust has been eroded to the detriment of global security. Peace and security depend on cooperation, not conflict, and we must find our way back to trust and stability. For this to happen, leaders must be willing to take risks and take a vulnerable position. But this can only happen if the leaders themselves are not driven by power and domination, but rather by innate core values that honor the sacredness of human life and understand the connection that we all have to one another. Each individual's values determine how they are in relation to others. and we must be very clear about what our values are and adhere to them as we move through life and face decisions and crossroads. Do our values include peace, compassion, understanding, and love? Are they based on sound ethical and moral principles, being fair, being honest, being truthful, and doing the right thing? We must do the inner work to ensure that our personal values align with the shared inherent spiritual values of the world's faith traditions. We must live in accordance with our moral compass, our ethical conscience, and advocate for the policies that align with our values. And we should elect and support leaders with character and integrity. 84% of the world's population are believers and adhere to a faith tradition. So we must not underestimate the importance of religious leaders as voices of inspiration and constantly remind us of our moral and ethical values and the importance of respecting the sanctity of life and honoring each life with the dignity and loving kindness that all things sacred deserve. We must not forget the events of that fateful day in Hiroshima in 1945. The temperature at ground level reached 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit in less than a second. The bomb vaporized people half a mile away from ground zero. Bronze statues melted, roof tiles fused together, and the exposed skin of people miles away burned from the intense infrared energy unleashed. At least 80,000 people died instantly, and the wood frame houses and all vegetation were burned to ashes. Amidst the devastation, however, within a few months, the people of Hiroshima were witness to the miracle of nature's remarkable resilience and powerful regenerative ability when flowers and trees began to bud and bloom amidst the ashes of the destroyed city. In this final video clip, Tomoko Watanabe, a Hiroshima resident and founder of the Asian Network of Trust NGO, shares this story.
私は渡辺智子と申します。私は被爆者の両親のもと、広島の地に生まれ育ちました。今、私は平和公園にいます。私の後ろに見えるのは原爆ドームです。広島では原爆投下後75年間は草木も生えないと言われていましたが、1945年9月にはカンナの花が咲き、翌年には焼けただれた樹木から緑の新芽が芽吹きました。黒や灰色の色のない世界に緑の新芽が芽吹いたことに、人々は感動し、涙を流し、勇気づけられて、再び生きていく力を樹木からもらいました。被爆樹木はその声なき声で、未来の子どもたちのために核兵器なき世界を実現するとともに、多くの地球上の命が共に生きることのできる世界を作り上げていく責務が私たちにあることを静かに語り続けています。
In nature, there's a powerful impetus to regenerate, to live, and to thrive. In spite of the havoc wreaked by the nuclear bomb, life went on and healing began. All living things have this remarkable regenerative healing quality. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are once again thriving cities with vibrant economies. Hiroshima is an international beacon of peace and remembrance, and evidence of Mother Nature's beautiful and tender rebirth. The lovely flowers, the budding trees, and the courage and resilience of the people. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida was born and raised in Hiroshima. In a 2022 speech on the 10th Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, Kishida said, "I cannot but admit that the path to a world without nuclear weapons has become even harder. Nevertheless, giving up is not an option. As a prime minister from Hiroshima, I believe that we must take every realistic measure towards a world without nuclear weapons, step by step, however difficult the path may be. I conclude with this poem from David Lorimer called, "We Are Here to Love." We are here to love and not to hate, to seek the paths of peace, not war, to forgive and not to avenge, to learn deep life lessons from each other. We are here to learn the laws of love, the laws of wisdom, the laws of truth, the laws of justice, the laws of goodness, the laws of beauty, the laws of freedom. We are here to learn the practice of kindness, the practice of compassion, the practice of empathy, the practice of trust, the practice of reconciliation. We're all here for each other, entwined with the whole of life, with animals, with birds, with insects, plants, and fungi. Here for a short time together, here to awaken, here to be, here to act together. Thank you all so very much for this privilege and opportunity to share with all of you today. Thank you.